Hi, I'm Peter J Rea. Welcome. Welcome aboard the USS Wonderful Books. Onward with the book parade. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 28. Our first book today is Whirlwind by James Clavell, 1986. This book has 1,270 pages. Oh, wow. That's pretty intimidating. I'm kind of surprised I read the book. I read it because it's a novel, historical novel set in Iran in 1979, which was such a dramatic time in history, because this was the beginning of when Iran became an Islamic state under the Ayatollah Khomeini, and really a leader in this whole Islamic Jihad movement, which has been very militant Muslim movement against the West and promoting Islam for the whole world, and has been very violent. This, with the 9/11 attacks, and these different terrorist attacks. And back then, the Iranians, when the Shah of Iran fell, and then he came to the United States, and then the Iranians took 50 Americans hostage in Iran. And that was an ordeal that went on for more than a year. And then every night you'd watch the national news, and these Iranians would be gathered, and they'd be chanting "Death to America" and burning the American flag. It was all very upsetting. Anyway, this novel deals with the nitty-gritty, what was going on in Iran in terms of a historical novel at that time. And it's very dramatic, and there are barbaric parts, and it's a very sobering book. The next book is The Cleveland Connection by Les Roberts, 1993. This is another Milan Yakovich novel, murder mystery set in Cleveland, Ohio. Milan Yakovich is the Sherlock Holmes of Cleveland. And remember, he's a Slovenian American, so Slovenia is a country from the former Yugoslavia on the Balkan Peninsula. And of course, and then he gets into the issue of Serbs, which were another Yugoslav people, and they had this big conflict between Serbs and Croats. And he talks here about, he gets into some good history, that 70,000 Serbs were murdered by the Nazis in a death camp outside Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in the Second World War. And in the story, the son of a man who was killed there avenges his father by killing an old Serb he mistakenly believed collaborated with the Nazis in the camp. And the West Side Market's mentioned. This is an interesting topic because there's been a lot of ethnic conflict between Serbs and other ethnic groups, especially the Croats. And the Croats were Catholic, and the Serbs are Orthodox Christians. So there's been an anti-Serb bias, which I think is unfortunate, and it's really based on the fact that the Croats are part of the Roman Catholic Church, which is a huge international organization. So they really have the support of the Catholic Church. Whereas the Serbs are, the Orthodox Church is very weak, and most of the Orthodox countries became communist and atheists, like Russia, and only Greece didn't become communists. But anyway, they didn't get much support, so that's why I think there's been this anti-Serb bias. And I have a very good friend who's a Serb. I think it's unfortunate to putting all the blame on the Serb. Although I also have Croat friends, so I certainly don't want to get into a conundrum here. The next book is Winning a Day at a Time by John Lucas with Joseph Moriarty, 1994. I read this book in 2002, and at that time, John Lucas was the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA. And in this book, he tells his story growing up in North Carolina, and he was a young tennis and basketball star. But then he developed alcoholism and drug addiction, and found recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. So this is kind of like what they call an AA lead. He's telling his story, and back when he was the coach, the Cavs were pretty bad, I know that, so he didn't have much to work with. Good fella, and he's a part of Cleveland Cavaliers history. And another fella talking about how there is hope. If you're an alcoholic, Alcoholics Anonymous is a wonderful organization which has helped millions of people, including myself. So I highly recommend it. And it can save your life if you have a drinking problem or a drug problem. The next book is A Ghetto Takes Shape, Black Cleveland, 1870 to 1930, by Kenneth L. Kusmer, 1976. This is a wonderful historical book, and it chronicles the development of Cleveland's black community, African American community, on the east side of Cleveland. Around 1900, they say, according to history, Cleveland was the best city in America for African Americans to live in. Of course, there weren't that many of them, but the ones who were here were treated well. However, there was a mass migration from the South during the First World War because of, there must have been factory jobs that had been opening up. And as these large numbers came to Cleveland, then racism increased in Cleveland, and blacks or African Americans were forced to live in a specific part of Cleveland, which is the definition of a ghetto, an area where an ethnic group is required to live. And so this develops, that meant Cleveland became segregated, which was very, very sad because of white middle-class insecurity. And then, of course, that's the history. And this was very tragic, very unfortunate, but it's reality, part of history. The next book is Unguarded, Lenny Wilkens, My 40 Years Surviving in the NBA, by Lenny Wilkens and Terry Pluto, published in 2000. This is a tremendous book, one of the best books I've read. Lenny Wilkens is the winningest coach in the NBA history. He won more games as an NBA coach than anyone else. He broke the record, which had been set by Red Auerbach, of 938 victories. And he was the greatest coach in NBA history, and he coached Cleveland for a time and got the Cavs to the 1992 East Finals. He actually played for the Cavs in the early 70s. I remember back the old arena seeing him play when I was a boy. And he got fired in 1993. It was too bad. Another interesting thing is that when he was in college, actually Lenny Wilkens had a tough childhood. I believe his mother was Irish, his father was African American, so he was a light-skinned African American fellow. And his father wasn't around, and they had tough times. He grew up real poor, and but he was he had to work in high school, and he went to college. He got a basketball scholarship, and he was planning to be an engineer. He studied engineering. He wanted to make a living, and then he found out that he'd been drafted in 1957 by the St. Louis Hawks. And he thought, back then the NBA really wasn't very popular, and he had no intention of being a pro basketball player, but he thought he'd go to the training camp. And he made the team, and the rest is history. He went on to have this incredible career as a player and a coach. And I think he's a good example of character. He's a good man. Lenny Wilkens is a very good man. Very, very soft-spoken, very patient, very hard-working and determined. Real kind of a low-key guy. He was not a showboat. He just worked hard and showed up and did his job. And this just shows how important character is. And the success he achieved really is because of his good character. Very good man, wonderful man. The next book is Crossing Over, One Woman's Exodus from Amish Life, by Ruth Irene Garrett with Rick Farrant, 2001. The Amish people are familiar to folks in Ohio. They're a rural people, and they really are living like a 19th century lives. They have horses and buggies, and they have farms, but they really are against the modern world. They don't believe in automobiles, and actually, they don't even believe in buttons. They believe that the buttons are ostentatious, a sense of pride. So they use like pins, I think, to put their clothes together. I'm not sure if they allow buttons now, but you see them if you go down in parts of Ohio, and they have big farms. They actually are successful. They do well in farming. They have butter. You can go down. You can have a tour, take a buggy ride. And it seems kind of idyllic, especially if you're kind of fed up with modern life. And you think, oh, look at the Amish people. They're living this simple life. But this woman, her description is that it is not as idyllic as it appears, but borders on a religious cult. And the people are kept in line through fear, ignorance, and intimidation. So they really aren't. They don't have freedom. And you really have to live a certain life. And women really are, I would say, second-class citizens in the Amish. And she ends up she decides she wants to, she's curious about the outer world, so she leaves and she's excommunicated, which is very tough. If you have to lose, that's the price you pay if you leave the Amish community, and she did that because she wanted to experience more, the wider world. So it's a wonderful story. The next book is Women in Cleveland, an illustrated history by Marion J. Morton, 1995. So this was good. Actually, as it turns out, Cleveland had a women's professional football team who played in a league, and they won the 1983 women's, you could say the women's NFL championship. 1983 Cleveland Brewers. How about that? And she talks about some other people. Stella Walsh, who was an Olympic athlete, won gold medals as a sprinter, and when she was an immigrant from Poland, and when she died, or when I think she was murdered when she died, and they did an autopsy and found out that she had male and female traits. That she was they call her hermaphrodite, like a male and female genital or sexual organs. And so the quote was, Stella was a fella. And they put an asterisk in the Olympic records that, she ran as a woman. But the thing is, what do you do if you have a child that has both, a vagina and a penis? What do you do? And so anyway, they raised her as a girl and kept it secret that she had the male organ. And other individuals, Jane Campbell, Madeline Manning, Mary Rose Okar. And so this is a good book in the history of women in Cleveland. The next book is The Lake Effect by Les Roberts, 1994. Again, this is another Milan Yakovich thriller set in Cleveland. And in this story, he's working as security in a suburban mayoral political campaign on the east side. And he gets into the mafia, politics, pettiness, unsavory aspects of life. But through it all, Milan Yakovich does his duty and is an honorable man while cracking the case in Cleveland, City of Champions. Wonderful. These are very entertaining books, the Milan Yakovich series. More than 20. In fact, I'm reading one at the moment. It's a current book. The next book is Men at Work, George F. Will, 1990. The Craft of Baseball. It's a good book. George Will is actually a political commentator. You see him on the Sunday morning talk shows. He talk, especially during a U.S. presidential election. But in this book, he's talking about baseball players, and he interviews a number of them, including Orel Hershiser, Tony Gwynn, who was a tremendous hitter, Cal Ripken, who broke the record set by Lou Gehrig, consecutive games played, Tony La Russa, who actually did real well, won more than one World Series championship. And so he's a big fan. George Will's a big fan. This is a baseball book written by the political commentator George Will. The next book is Crooked River Burning by Mark Weingardner, 2001. This is a tremendous book. I highly recommend it. It's a historical novel set in Cleveland, Ohio. It takes place between 1948 and 1969. And at the very beginning, you have the Cleveland Indians winning the World Series. And everyone's celebrating, and they had their parade from Public Square down Euclid Avenue over by where the Cleveland Clinic is, and what do you call that? The Art Museum and so forth. This is these characters. It's a novel, and these characters are celebrating. They're all happy. The Indians won the World Series, and then it shows Cleveland through the 50s and 60s. The domination of the Cleveland Browns, with fellows like Paul Brown, the coach, Jim Brown, the tremendous running back, Art Modell, who became the owner later, and then in the 50s and in the 60s, the decline in Cleveland. Elliot Ness, who was a great crime fighter. They had the so-called Untouchables, and Alan Freed. One of the things he did is he didn't have a gun. He would go to arrest criminals, and he wouldn't bring a gun because he figured, that maybe they wouldn't shoot him. And it actually worked. He would go in and hope to get them to surrender peacefully. And he was never shot and killed. Alan Freed, who organized the first rock concert the Moondog Coronation Ball at the old arena, although they didn't get through it because the police came in and shut it down because a lot of people disapproved of rock and roll music back then. And he was a disc jockey from Cleveland who promoted rock and roll. And actually, this is why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland, because of Alan Freed and his first rock concert and what he did promoting rock and roll music on the radio. Actually, he's buried over on Lakeview Cemetery on the east side, if you are ever interested in paying your respects to him. Dorothy Fulltime was a wonderful TV news lady, very opinionated, and she was inspired the women in Cleveland. Carl Stokes, who was the first African-American mayor of a large city. Bill Veeck, the Indians owner, a little earlier, Satchel Paige, and so forth. So this is a wonderful book. It captures the changing times, from 48 to 6, because our country and the city changed a lot during that time. Did a really good job. The next book is Women at Play, The Story of Women in Baseball by Barbara Gregorich, 1993. Wow, this is a tremendous book. What an eye-opener. Now, we know that African-American men were prohibited from playing Major League Baseball. That kind of was established in the late 1800s, and none of them played until 1946 when Jackie Robinson played. But it turns out that women have also been prevented from playing Major League Baseball. And there have been women who've had the ability, but they said, no, you can't play. And one of probably my favorite baseball movies, A League of Their Own, when they had women's professional baseball during the Second World War and for a time afterward. And it had the character played by Tom Hanks is actually based on Jimmy Fox. In the movie, it's Jimmy Dugan, and Jimmy Fox was a tremendous player who a lot of big home run hitter, played for the Philadelphia A's, and actually he ended up settling in Lakewood, Ohio. There's a park. We were getting a haircut the other day. We saw Jimmy Fox, this park that he had donated to Lakewood. It's too bad. Of course, he died, I think, in 1972. I didn't get to know him. Just a boy. And the author makes a bold prediction that one day women will play Major League Baseball. How about that? When we had dinner with Bob Feller, I asked him about that, and he said he hoped not. He didn't like the idea of women playing. But, they really should allow that if they have the ability. So we'll see about that. Up till now, it hasn't happened. This book came out 2002, so it's been 15 years. That would be really something, wouldn't it? The next book is The Art of War by Sun Tzu, 500 BC, edited and with a foreword by James Clavell in 1983. This was lent to me by a student at Resalest, Pep Santos, and it's really something. It's actually a very spiritually significant book. It's not just, you think of war as not being spiritual, but this is a spiritual book. And his main idea is that if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you will succeed. You will win in war. But if you don't know the enemy or yourself, you will lose. And that's a very simple idea, but very profound, because very often in war, you don't know the enemy because it's a different culture and you're just ignorant. And then you really don't know yourself because we're often blind, to as individuals or as entities like a military about the weaknesses. You have to be honest with yourself, and very often people aren't honest. They're they don't realize they don't know their own strengths. In this case, as an army, and they don't know the enemy, and they lose. So I thought that was a very profound point that he makes. The next book is Pepper Pike by Les Roberts, 1988. Pepper Pike is a suburb on the east side of Cleveland. This is another Milan Yakovich novel, the Slovenian-American private eye who cracks the case in Cleveland, Ohio, and takes time during his travels and investigations to usually to step in the neighborhood watering hole in the old neighborhood and have a beer and then see how the Indians, Cavaliers or Browns are doing on television. Somebody will tell them what the score and what's going on. The next book is Glory for Sale, John Morgan, 1997. This is the story of how the Cleveland Browns became the Baltimore Ravens and how the money aspect of professional sports is getting out of hand. Millionaire owners who pay millionaire players while millionaire fans watch, and the pitiful desperation of sports fans for championships. Yeah, this he talks here about how cities are competing for teams. There are only really 30 teams in the three major leagues, and other cities are hoping to get it, so they try to tempt them away and just so these teams move. They think, well, I'll try to get a better deal somewhere else, so they take the team and move it somewhere else. And there's been a lot of that happening. In fact, this year in the NFL, the Chargers moved from San Diego to Los Angeles, and supposedly the Oakland Raiders will be moving to Las Vegas. And originally the Cleveland Rams moved to St. Louis, then they moved to Los Angeles, then they moved from Cleveland to Los Angeles, they moved to St. Louis, now they're back in L.A. And so, back in the 70s, years ago, it was you could go to a game. The games were very cheap, very inexpensive, very affordable. But now the money aspect has gotten really, with cable television, people are paying a lot of money to watch games on TV. And the players are getting so much more. Back in the 70s, a lot of guys were getting $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, not much. And now, if you get $1 million, if they're a player making $1 million, isn't that much? And you have guys, unbelievable contracts, or maybe getting $25 million a year. Actually, I think there's a $300 million contract for I don't know how many years. So it's really a big business now, and like he says, the owners, takes a lot of money to buy a team, and the players will make a lot. And actually, if you want to go nowadays, it's almost very hard to go if you're just a regular Joe, unless you got to have money. It's unbelievable how much people are paying for tickets now. The next book is Safe at Home, A Baseball Wife's Story by Sharon Hargrove and Richard Howard Koska, 1989. Of course, Sharon Hargrove is the wife of Mike Hargrove, who played Major League Baseball for the Texas Rangers and the Cleveland Indians. And I don't know who else he played for, but he became a manager as well. Managed the Indians for a couple of World Series. He managed Baltimore. And then she's talking about, they were married. He had his wife, and they had children, and boy, did they have to move a lot. There was so much moving, and then as a player or coach, you're traveling all the time. So this was pretty tough. She had to raise a family, and when he get traded, and or as a coach, he was getting different jobs. So it was pretty tough. She had to move so many times. And it was really hard on the children, but that's what they had to do. And the father being away so much, especially during the summer, especially as a baseball player and coach, and the kids are out of school. But so anyway, she made the best of it, and they're both good people. Mike Hargrove was a pretty sober fella. He's a good man, kind of sober, kind of subdued, maybe depressed. I think he hasn't gotten over the 1997 World Series, which Cleveland, as my father said, came within a whisker of winning. And we had the lead in Game 7, the ninth inning, and slipped away. Anyway, the next book is Friday Night Lights by H.G. Bissinger, 1990. This book is the chronicle of the Permian Panthers high school football team in Odessa, Texas, where the town was obsessed with its football team. And actually they had, I believe, a stadium with 20,000 seats. So for them, this was a big deal. They made a Friday Night Lights. They made a movie, I think, or a movie and maybe a TV show, and it shows it's a small town, and boy, this is everything. The people, they're not so much interested in professional teams as their high school team. So there's so much pressure on these guys in high school and on the coach. That you got to win, and they expect him not only to win games, but to win state championships in Texas. So this book talks about this Boobie Miles, who's this running back on the team who gets hurt, and he's a star player, and then he can't play. And then they put him in when he's really, maybe isn't ready to play, and he gets hurt again, and kind of, anyway, so this is tough. A real interesting story. I highly recommend this book. The next book is Summer of 49 by David Halberstam, 1989. I thought this was a wonderful book. It's about the 1949 baseball season, specifically about the New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox rivalry and competition for the American League pennant, which went all the way to the end of the year, all the way to the wire. And then you have star players like Joe DiMaggio on the Yankees and Ted Williams on the Red Sox, Phil Rizzuto, Dom DiMaggio. You had two brothers in this rivalry, Joe on the Yankees and Dom for the Red Sox. Johnny Pesky for the Red Sox, and the Pesky pole was named after him. I think the right field foul pole. And at Roosevelt Park in the Philippines, we had this. We called it something about one of the guys. I think it was Nico DeCini. Said, "Oh, let's call that the Pesky pole." He'd become aware of that. Tommy Henrik, and I think the Yankees won. And this is the ongoing rivalry. And David Halberstam was a wonderful author. It's very well written. It's very, very pleasant, very heartwarming. And I think they got the guys together years later. And you can see there's still some tension, because of this old rivalry that they had. And then, of course, they were able to overcome that because they're all, players, and time passes, and you got to get over these things. The next book is The Summer Game by Roger Angell, 1972. This is about Major League Baseball in the 1960s, especially the World Series. The fall of the New York Yankees, who had been so dominant in the 1960s, went into decline because they were one of the teams that really wouldn't sign African American players, and that left them in the dust because there were so many talented players, and they didn't really bring many in. They brought in a few just to show that they weren't racist, but they actually were. And so they kept with white players, and that led to their demise. So they used to say in the late 50s the Washington Redskins were the whitest and worst team in the NFL because they did the same thing. They didn't want to sign African American players. The Baltimore Orioles were a very tough team in this era, and Cleveland ended up getting two of their strong players, Frank Robinson and Boog Powell, who were stars for the Orioles. Willie Mays for the San Francisco Giants. Sandy Koufax for the LA Dodgers. Johnny Bench, tremendous catcher and hitter for the Reds. Mudcat Grant for the Twins, later the Indians. Harmon Killebrew was a tremendous hitter. Lou Brock, and so forth. I thought this is a poetic book. Very well. Roger Angell is a tremendous author. Writes baseball books. The next book is Behind the Mask, My Double Life in Baseball by Dave Pallone with Alan Steinberg, 1990. This fellow was a Major League Baseball umpire, and he was a homosexual. And I think after his career as an umpire, he came out of the closet. It wasn't known that he was gay, and so he tells his experiences and about being gay and kind of awkward because it's in this macho environment, and so he's talking about how tough it is to be an umpire because the fans and the player, everybody hates the umpire, gives them a hard time because they have to make decisions, and one of the teams is going to be mad. Same thing in the NFL and the NBA. A very tough job these guys have, these officials that have to make decisions. If you're an umpire calling balls and strikes, it's very, who's to say? And a lot of the pitches are very close to being whether it's a ball or a strike. And plays at first base, out, safe or out call, stuff like that. So he talks about that. The next book is The Final Season by Tom Stanton, 2001. My friend Sue Brokaw in Boston sent me this book because I guess she thought I'd like it. It talks about the last year of Tiger Stadium in Detroit, 1999. They were going to tear it down and move into a new ballpark. And so, and then the fans were aware of it, so people wanted to go, to be a part of that. So it's about fathers and sons and one last season in a classic American ballpark. Right, reminded me of my father and I going to games at Cleveland Municipal Stadium in the 1970s. I saw a lot of Indians games back then. And actually, the last year of the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium was 1993, but I was in the Philippines, so I didn't get to do what this author did, which is to go to games with his old elderly father one last time. I didn't get to do that with my dad because I wasn't around. But anyway, I got to read this book and enjoy this father-son experience with baseball. It's such an interesting topic and very, very relevant. And it appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find a good book to read. And onward with the book parade. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.